February 28, 2025. Donald Trump hosted Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the White House. The meeting was supposed to be about a potential deal that would give the United States access to Ukraine's rare mineral reserves. Instead, it turned into an insult session. Zelensky was publicly insulted, humiliated, and eventually getting evicted from the White House. And to everyone's surprise, the European Union united behind Ukraine, making it clear that it was no longer afraid to stand up to the United States. But did Europe's rebellious streak begin that day? No. Back in 2023, the European Union brought in one of the world's most respected economists, Mario Draghi. He wasn't hired to write another economic report or make vague recommendations. His job was to diagnose a single problem. Why was Europe falling behind the United States? And what would it take to close that gap?
This effort will require a sustained effort from all allies.
Probably noticed Europe's a very different place than it was 20 years ago.
Certain places in Europe are not even recognizable, frankly, anymore.
The retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values.
Europeans annoy me sometimes, and yes, I disagree with them on certain issues.
Could you take on Russia by yourselves?
Well,
Welcome to Behind the Numbers, and today we will be talking about Europe's biggest weakness, the American technology. It takes a lot of effort, time and heart to bring these videos for you, so kindly hit that subscribe button. Around 70% of Europe's cloud infrastructure is controlled by American companies. In simple terms, cloud infrastructure is made up of data centers that store and process your digital life, from your emails and photos to much of your online activity. In 2018, the United States passed the Cloud Act, giving US authorities the power to demand data held by American tech companies, even if that data is stored on servers outside the United States. In other words, a significant amount of Europeans' data could still be subject to US legal access. So in 2019, Europe launched Gaia-X to challenge America's dominance in cloud infrastructure. The goal was simple: build a European cloud platform where businesses and governments could store their data without relying on American tech companies. But years later, Gaia-X had failed to deliver any meaningful cloud infrastructure. In fact, one of its own founding members called it a crushing failure and a colossal waste of time. Despite being the home of royalty, prestige, and centuries of history, Europe was surprisingly vulnerable to the reach of US authorities. Europe and the United States have a lot in common. Both have similarly sized populations, massive economies, advanced societies, and some of the wealthiest regions in the world. But when it comes to technology, the gap between them is enormous. In fact, if you combine the value of Europe's 4 largest tech companies, they still aren't worth even half of Amazon alone. And if you combine the value of the 5 largest American tech companies, it would have the 3rd largest GDP in the world. But despite this massive gap, Europe is still fighting to regain control from American tech. However, confidence alone doesn't guarantee victory. And perhaps the biggest proof of that is Euro's performance against the US dollar. Another reason European tech struggles to compete is the way investment works. Every year, Europe invests around 700 billion euros, less in technology than the United States. In America, retirement savings are typically invested into pension and investment funds, which then buy shares in companies. As a result, billions of dollars from ordinary people's retirement savings continuously flow into the tech sector. Europe, however, follows a very different model. In European countries, governments collect money from today's workers and use it to pay today's retirees, leaving far less private capital available to invest in fast-growing tech companies. As a result, pension assets invested in the stock market amount to just 32% of GDP in the European Union, compared with 142% in the United States, giving American companies access to far more long-term investment capital. Another important factor is inherited wealth. Unlike the United States, a much larger share of wealth in Europe is inherited rather than self-made. As a result, European investors tend to focus more on preserving their wealth than taking the kind of high-risk bets that often fuel the next generation of tech giants. Then there's another reason Europe enters this fight with its hands tied behind its back. Almost every card and mobile payment in Europe still runs on American infrastructure, primarily Visa and MasterCard. Europe tried to change that in 2024, when 16 of its largest banks joined forces to launch a homegrown payment system called Wero. but the project failed miserably. In its first year, Wero processed around 7.5 billion euros in payments. For comparison, Visa and MasterCard process more than 7 trillion euros in payments across Europe every year. And the United States has shown that it is willing to use this leverage. After Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, Visa and MasterCard suspended services for Russian banks following US sanctions, disrupting payment services for many customers almost overnight. It was a stark reminder of how control over payment infrastructure can become a powerful geopolitical tool. And that's why Europe still isn't giving up. The problem with Wero was that adoption was voluntary. It was never mandated for countries or financial institutions. But earlier this year, EU governments signed a MOU to develop a truly pan-European payment system, aiming to reduce Europe's dependence on American payment networks. In theory, it would connect Europe's existing national payment networks into a single unified system, allowing payments and transfers across the continent without relying on American payment infrastructure. And beyond all of this, Europe is also falling behind in innovation. Nothing illustrates that better than Volkswagen, once the pride of Germany and the engine of Europe's industrial might. As the world shifted toward electric vehicles and software-driven cars, Volkswagen struggled to keep pace, exposing Europe's broader innovation problem. Despite all these setbacks, Europe shows no signs of backing down. For example, Apple was forced to allow app distribution outside the App Store for the first time in its history. This means European developers can now distribute their apps directly to users without being forced to pay Apple's App Store commission. WhatsApp was also forced to open its platform to third-party messaging apps, ending years of operating as a closed ecosystem. Despite all of this, Europe shows no signs of giving up, but the reality is that it may already be late. For decades, American technology has become deeply embedded in Europe's economy. Its payment systems, cloud infrastructure, software and digital services have become part of the continent's foundation. Untangling that dependence won't happen by launching a few new apps or creating another payment platform. And the United States has little incentive to surrender such a powerful advantage. Technology isn't just a business anymore, it's a geopolitical weapon. Whoever controls the digital infrastructure also holds enormous influence over economies, data, and even national security. If Europe truly wants digital sovereignty, it will need far more than regulations and ambitious announcements. It will need revolutionary changes, massive investment, a culture that rewards innovation and risk-taking, and homegrown companies capable of competing with Silicon Valley. Because in the race for technological supremacy, catching up is far harder than staying ahead. Subscribe to our channel and don't forget to click the bell icon.